Welcome to our series Westborough Architectural Walking Tours with Music. These walks were developed as part of the town's 300th anniversary in 2017 and now provide a chance for all interested parties to delve into Westborough's architecture, culture, and history, all without leaving the couch. This is walk number 2, an archaeology primer, pre-European history, environmental protection, and the importance of Cedar Swamp.
Come on, just jump around a little bit. Get your body, get the old blood circulating.
Yeah, let's move though. Move, yeah.
Oh, I'm tired now. Hey, wait, we have a little bit of walk.
Michelle, don't you have some?
Okay, anyway, so...
Yeah, right.
You have some exercises first, don't you?
Yeah, right, there you go.
Yeah, that's right. We have a yoga not only do we have an archaeologist, we have a yoga teacher here. I mean, this should be easy to stay warm today. So welcome to our second walking tour. My name is Christopher Noonan. We're doing one of these per month over the year. As we go through the interconnectedness of our cultural resource world here in Westborough, we do try to bring people in that help us out. So Michelle is our guest today. She's an actually trained archaeologist, and more importantly, she's actually worked on this site. So there's a perspective there that most of us hopefully can gain from. So one of the things you're going to first see is we are not actually going into any specific archaeological site. Part of the reason is it's against the law. State of Massachusetts, as most parts of the country, archaeological sites are rare and sensitive, and it's not that it's not public information when the digs are done, but more importantly, the access to it is sort of directed because they don't want people coming and picking sites. And as we know internationally, whether it's in Syria or Afghanistan, Iraq, one of the major problems with conflict is that archaeological sites get damaged. Sometimes the symbolism that is connected to those sites is obliterated. So in our book today, if you go to the second page, you will see that pamphlet that the Westborough Land Trust put together. It does give a really easy way on the web to access what's here. Now also, if you take a quick look at this, you notice the yellow land is actually owned by St. Luke's Church. So I don't know who's a member of St. Luke's Church, but somewhere along the way, through the graciousness of the church, they decided they were going to allow public access. And then what you notice is there's some parcels that we're going to walk into, and those are actually, some of them are owned by DCR, which is the Massachusetts State Department of Conservation and Recreation, part of Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs. So it's publicly owned, paid for by state taxes. Part of it's a private nonprofit, like the Westborough Land Trust with the Sudbury Valley Trust property, that's in the green. And so you see what happens is several government nonprofit groups came together and therefore allow for an experience like that. Now, what we also have to understand is this is a National Register district, so who knows anything about the National Register of Historic Places? Anybody? Okay. This is sort of the inventory of all the cultural resources all across the United States. There's literally thousands and thousands and thousands. Some of them are buildings, some are objects, some are like the Main Street, much of our downtown is actually a National Register Historic District, but this is a fairly rare thing. This is a National Register Archaeological District. It covers 2,500 acres. So even though they've done some digs, which Michelle will talk about in a little bit, this is a huge, huge piece of property.
Now, before our walk continues, let's hear a little bit about Cedar Swamp from Derek Sari, an employee of the town for over 20 years, previously conservation officer and currently the assistant director of the Department of Public Works.
Good afternoon, my name is Derek Sari. We're here looking at beautiful Cedar Swamp, at least a portion of Cedar Swamp, down at the end of Brigham Street. I've done and will continue to do a lot of work within Cedar Swamp. It's a major drainage area in our community. It's got a pretty rich history. Back in 1973, it was called the Agency of Natural Resources. Today that's called the Department of Environmental Protection. Recognized that Cedar Swamp had tremendous values that were being altered by a lot of development, industrial development specifically, along Flanders Road. And the agency and its director saw that Cedar Swamp was valuable for flood control due to its size and its natural impoundment features. It was also important because Cedar Swamp served a major function for the protection of water supplies. And thirdly, they recognized that Cedar Swamp Pond, the Sudbury River, was very important as a recreational component.
We'll be hearing more from Derek a little later in the program. Now let's hear from Michelle about why Cedar Swamp is such an important archaeological site.
Because there's not a lot of work that's being done on the inland areas and on the swamp areas. And they really are starting to see that understanding how people use those is becoming important to understanding how the whole thing fits together. And Cedar Swamp is one of the few in New England that's actually being worked on. There's a lot of coastal stuff and a lot of the sides of river stuff, and all of that stuff is being done, you know, and has money for it. But not many people have followed the rivers all the way up to their headwaters and gone into the swamps and the wetland areas and actually looked to see what were people doing there and what were these sites used for. And if you look at Cedar Swamp, you're looking at a continuous occupation for 8,000 years.
And this is pre-European.
Pre-European, 8,000 years of occupation. So, you know, a long time. And so that is not really understood.
You know, when we were growing up, our history was that there was nothing here until the soldiers showed up in 1620.
Right, we all showed up and helped.
Right,
out.
exactly.
There was a civilization here for thousands of years that just got destroyed when the Europeans came.
So if you go to page 3, one of the things that they've done here in Massachusetts, and again, a lot of states across the country, everything is divided into river basin areas. So here we're in the Cedar Swamp Basin. You can see it's a huge, huge part of Westborough. But you can also see there are several other basins, part of the Assabet, which later on connects to the Sudbury, and then later on becomes the Concord River, that then dumps into the Merrimack, so it's way up in Lawrence, Mass. And of the whole community, everything basically is flowing into the Assabet or the Sudbury, with one small exception. If you look in the lower left, the Misco Brook, that actually goes into the Blackstone Basin. This is the area I grew up in, Mendon in the Blackstone Valley. And so it's only that teeny little bit that actually drains that way.
Except I'm going to add too, from the archaeological point of view, you got 3 major rivers that come together here. You could have paddled up all of them and come to this place, and then portage, very small portages at the time, to be able to go in many different directions. Sudbury River, the Blackstone River enters into Narragansett Bay. The Assabet headwaters connect you to the Concord, the Merrimack. All of those pathways were used by them. So you imagine how far they could go just from this point. They had access to many different other tribes, as well as to, you know, many other resources. So you look at it from this point of view, from this where we are now, and you say, well, that's a long way to go to those brooks, but at the time it wasn't. This used to be Lake Sudbury, all of it. So it was all underwater. And as the land started to rise up after 12,000 years ago, the land started to didn't come up, the water started to recede. Then you're looking at, you know, areas where the Indians started to make homes and make hunting camps and, you know, various places to make tools and gather certain nuts and berries and all that kind of stuff. And it was way more linked than it is now. There was a lot more water here. What made it dry up?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know specifically what. Yeah, I mean, climate change. Well, and also, you know, see, it could have been that something else defrosted, and so the water began to drain. The research final project that I was reading through, it didn't say what the event was. It just said some major drainage event.
I mean, it only takes a very small amount to make a big difference.
It does.
And there was a rebound of the land after the glaciers left, because the glaciers were so heavy that when it melted, the land actually rose back up again. And it, you know, a matter of inches could make a big difference.
Something that other communities are doing, and Westborough might consider, is signage of the waterways to allow people to see exactly how surface water flows through our community. Now let's move from the water routes that people of this area would have taken to the land routes.
These are Indian trails. This Contact and Plantation Period Trail, this is some of the work that Mass Historic Commission, which again is a state agency, did way back in the 70s and 80s. So if you look, you can see this overlays, this trail system. You can see Westborough on the right-hand side. Now, later on, when it's warm and at home or at the local restaurant or pub, whichever one prefers, you'll notice all those trail systems line up with each other pretty much. And if you also notice, again, Westborough's on the right side, you see there's a major sort of northeast to southwest trail that's going on. So today, you can take the same map and you overlay the interstates. And guess what? You're going to find that the interstates follow some of the most major routes. And so humans have a tendency, I guess, to follow each other's path, because really for thousands of years, they've been traveling, whether it's walking, canoeing, all the way to, you know, cars that don't need drivers, you know, as a way to get from one place to the other.
You got two major intersecting Indian trails in Westborough, and so it was a huge crossroads for trading, for movement, for hunting, for gathering, for, you know, seasonal camping. Westborough was like a big summer camp for a couple thousand years.
That's like Route 9.
Yeah.
Route 9 was the major route.
Right.
It really was. And Milk Street.
Yeah.
Beginning of the colonial period, you know, whether it's Plymouth Plantation in 1620 or Boston in 1630, most of the coast, Salem, Newburyport, et cetera, people started moving inland almost immediately, and you can see the dates. So Mendon was a plantation town in Worcester County along with Lancaster. You also see here on the bottom right, you see Hassanemesco Plantation. This is one of John Eliot's praying communities. So this is one of the places that Native Americans were actually sort of Christianized, were sort of directed to. There actually is a wonderful site just in North Grafton that again, a mix of the Grafton Land Trust, some state funding have preserved like 250 acres. That is sort of the core piece of the Hassanemesco Plantation. And again, there's a lot of archaeological potential there that has not been explored, but at least it's protected to give that opportunity. So go to page 7 real quick. You can see Cedar Swamp is huge. I mean, this is all part of this approximately 2,500 acres. And then also you see how small the downtown village is. So the village is like 550 historic resources coming together to make the downtown village. Well, Cedar Swamp is just this huge area, and as Michelle mentioned earlier, you know, there's so much resourcing to still be done to really get that full story understood. Okay, and then two other quick things.
Well, just since you're on page 7, see where it says Newton Hill, 648 feet on the right in red? That was one of the major sites from the Indians traveling from Boston and up into this area to gather quartzite. That's where their major quartzite site was. So they would chip off chunks of the quartzite from that hill and bring it into Cedar Swamp, and then they had work areas where they would chip it down and make tools from it.
Now, before continuing our trek into Cedar Swamp, let's hear a little more about quartzite from Westborough resident Andy Koenigsberg. Andy is a practicing hydrogeologist and has served with both the Westborough Conservation Commission and the Open Space Committee. Here he is at a previous walk in Pine Grove Cemetery, which abuts Cedar Swamp, explaining Westborough's connection to quartzite.
From a archaeological/geological perspective, there is a rock formation called the Westborough Formation that is actually found throughout the whole Northeast. This is the type locality. It is a material called quartzite, which, just like you have marble crystallized from limestone, these are sands that have crystallized into a material called quartzite. When you go to the beach and you see these white or light gray stones, those are quartzite. If you want to know what it looks like, people know where Colonial Volkswagen is up on Route 9. There's a big rock outcrop, sort of a cream-colored rock. That's Westborough quartzite. The interesting thing about it is it fractures, makes very, very sharp edges, and the Paleo-Indians would come here to get the quartzite to make arrowheads and stone axes and things like that.
All right, so if we go back to page 8, so the other nice thing that Westborough has done over the years is that they've actually tried to arrange their land use systems, meaning what, again, gets sort of promoted by the planning board and other land use boards, conservation commissions and stuff, has frequently having to go through town meeting. And what you notice is Cedar Swamp, which is sort of this area that with lots of red on the right-hand side where the sort of the elbow is. So whether it was conscious or not, what's really nice is, of course, that protected open space also helps protect the archaeological resource that's sitting below us. And also, in a smart economic way, they also have zones for office parks, you know, strip development, other places where tax bases can be developed, but they're not threatening what the resource itself is. When you take a look at, so now let's go to the last picture, and then
before you leave that,
oh sure, go ahead.
I see a lot of red, private, unprotected along the railroad track there, right? I mean,
well, there is some, but the fact is it's on the inside. So think about it. So the only access there is to what you just said. It's the railroad. But one of the things that's important in land use is you also need, for today, how we perceive it, you need access. So unless there's access to something, and we also, with the regulations around you know, the tiering of wetlands, it's pretty hard sometimes, even though someone might privately own something. And usually what people like that do over time, whether it's individuals or companies or LLPs or LLs, is they donate it because there is a healthy tax write-off, John, right? And so that's one of the things that land trusts actually enjoy. So if anyone wants to donate any land, talk to John or the land trust, because that's actually part of their function and role in helping out balance the community. All right, last one, page 9. What I was trying to show here, this is Bay State Abrasives, now today the Bay State Commons. First, you can see how large this industrial site was. And if you look, way in the very top is Cedar Swamp Pond. And so that's the place we're not going to quite be able to get all the way out to, but all that open space to the left and right is basically undeveloped. And if you think about it, if you take Hoppington Road, South Street, East Main Street, and Flanders Road, that's what basically boxes in South Cedar Swamp. What it also does, if you look at the development, whether it's industrial, commercial, or residential, it doesn't go very deep off the road system. That's because they immediately come to the Great Swamp and they can't build anymore because of sort of different federal, state, or local regulations. So anyway, but in the old days, and we're talking pre-60s, 70s, what you see is, of course, wetlands weren't considered very valuable. They weren't considered for water resource issues. They weren't considered even for archaeological issues beyond that. And so people would just sort of build, and of course the land was inexpensive, and so they would just sort of encroach. So today I guess we like to think about it more of in a balanced way.
So this site was really just kind of ongoing when I moved to Westborough back in the early 80s, and they were working on the island and on the far side. But even if you just look at here, okay, this is all farmed now and it's all being cleared. And the Indians were starting to use it around 3,000 years ago for the same purpose that it's used now, because it was a lake. It has good soil underneath all of that, not as you get closer into the swamp. But as this land started to emerge from underneath water, they did start to clear. And there is evidence that around 3,000 years ago that the floral and fauna mix and algae mixes of all the different things, the soil, the water, and all that stuff started to shift. You got woodworking and canoe making around 6,000 years ago. You got tree nuts and seeds being gathered, and you're finding old fire pits, you're finding garbage sites, but you're not finding necessarily still places where they inhabited it full time. Okay, so that's 6,000. And then by 3,000, now you're talking there's a dramatic increase in, like I was talking about before, changes in pollen counts, changes in algae contents in the water, and they're starting to show them becoming more sedentary and domestic activities. And that gets shown because now you show communal structures being built 3,000 years ago. There's evidence of, like, you know, ceramic making. Ceramic decorating. You've got pits for cooking things. You've got earth ovens showing up. You have platforms showing up for drying and cooking meat and smoking things. So now you've got, you know, not just a camp where everything kind of gets done quickly and you're skinning things and you're moving on. Now you've got places where people are coming together and families are coming, and you've got designated areas for things, including garbage. But if we go backwards in time to like 12,000 years ago, when the land first started being, land and not water, you're talking mostly fall activities, deer hunting, nut gathering, predominantly fall fishing villages. You know, nothing settled here. They came in from the coast, but they didn't live here. They mostly came in to forage here. And then around 6,000 years ago, you start to see that the central island in Cedar Swamp really emerged from Lake Sudbury, which was what this was all called at that time. And it's been inhabited from that point on. So the time periods for that run anywhere between the top of the island, around 8,000 years old, and then continuously since then. So really, for about 8,000 years, they lived here on the island.
How would they want to live on an island?
Well, why would you want to live on an island? Protection.
Actually, quietness, silence.
Get to be surrounded by water.
You.
Right. So you paddle up the Sudbury River and you get to this island, and it's safe, and no one can get to you except as they come by boat as well. You can see all around it. You can't be surprised by animals. All of that. It was safe.
Do we know all this from excavation?
Yes. So, for example, and I did a lot more at Charlestown Meadow than I did here, so I can talk more about Charlestown Meadow than I can this site particularly. We came across like layers where you just take off the surface and you would find the post markings from houses, and you'd be able to actually, because they wouldn't be left, wood wouldn't be left, but the roundness of the poles would be, and you could start to, go out and you could see how big the house was because the pole markings were still there and they had rotted into the earth. Or you find like the smoking platforms where they would dry their meat and smoke their meat and their fish.
And just for clarification, Charles is actually where the Toll Brothers project is, right? In that
it's where Westborough Station is now.
I'm sorry, on
Charlestown Meadow. There was a huge site there. We worked on that one for about a decade. That was a major camp. Like that was pretty much year-round. And Cedar Swamp and that one were going at the same time. So Cedar Swamp wasn't the only place they were coming to. There was also Hockomock Pond and all of that up behind there where Westborough Station is now. And across the road where that new Toll Brothers place is, that's all archaeological.
One of the things is today, any kind of major transportation utility project almost inevitably have to hire archaeological teams to deal with whatever their impacts are. So tell them about the other interesting thing about Westborough, that a lot of the artifacts that are...
Well, Westborough is one of the only towns in this whole, in Massachusetts actually, that has the right to keep our own artifacts. And that was a really long process to get the right to keep them. But we're one of the only towns that actually gets to store and manage our own artifacts. Everyone else has to turn them over to the state, and then the state does with them whatever they do with them, throw them in boxes in basements mostly, and don't do much with them, but keep them, preserve them. And Westborough is legally responsible. There's a small museum that I created of the more interesting artifacts, because it's a lot of the times something doesn't necessarily look like something, but we found it in situ. So we found it in a midden site, like a garbage site. And that's how, unfortunately, if you think about what we throw away now, archaeologically they're going to be able to come back to Cedar Swamp and Harvey's and dig it all up and figure out what we all did at this time period, right?
1800s to the 22nd century.
Exactly. So it's often the garbage dumps that you find out the most about a culture, because that's where they threw away the pottery, they threw away things that were broken, they threw away, something that, they weren't using at that time, but it's in situ, and then it's got organic material around it so you can date it, and often it gets charcoal thrown into the same pit from the fire pits and burnt things, so you can now date it. And
this is a basic principle in all cultural resources. This is even true with buildings. So having something in whenever it was created by humans, to be able to find it and sort of contextually understand it before it gets moved is a really basic principle, whether it's archaeology or, again, a historic building. Because even a historic building, if it's on the National Register and someone moves it, a mile away because of some good reason or some less than stellar reason, all of a sudden that building has lost its historic and architectural context. And so it's not that the building itself is not important, but it's not important because it doesn't connect to other parts of the story, which is, why is it on Main Street? What was it used on Main Street? Who lived there on Main? Well, it's sort of the same thing.
Right. Context is more important than the artifact itself, almost.
There's some truth to that.
Now let's hear a little more from Derek Sari about recent and ongoing efforts to both protect the town from flooding and to safeguard Cedar Swamp from the activities of modern life that surround it.
So we're on Flanders Road. We're in the parking lot at the entrance to the Sikh temple, and in the background is Cumberland Farms, where we actually have a sewer pump station that's being rehabbed right now, that town meeting approved. Cumberland Farms is within Cedar Swamp, and there's a tremendous amount of drainage that runs through their property. They're kind of the depository for a tremendous amount of stormwater that not only comes in off the interstates, but as far north as Technology Drive. So it's about 1,008 acres. It goes down to the Fruit Street underpass and then out to Hopkinton via Sudbury. So Cumberland Farms, town of Westborough, Department of Public Works, probably 12 years ago, kind of partnered up, and we kind of shared the cost. So we went through and we actually cleaned all of the systems from Fruit Street back to the pump station and beyond to 495. And we actually don't have any problems anymore with flooding down on this particular area. We do have beaver activity, unfortunately, that we're addressing, and that's a constant problem that we need to maintain. So building partnerships with the private businesses has been important for the protection of Cedar Swamp. There's a lot of stormwater along the peripheral edges, and again, those are maintained, so we feel that we're doing our part to ensure that the water quality is met to the best of our abilities.
So they didn't have any metal until the contact with Europeans? Is that?
Well, that's actually not true. They
Oh.
had silver. They traded for silver.
Okay.
But that's not that.
But it's not like it's common that you.
No.
Okay.
Where did they find silver?
Oh, well, they traded.
We have a
for
story to
silver.
tell you.
Yeah. We're talking. You know, you got the Nipmunks here, right? Then you got the Mohawks, and then you've got the Ganawage up in Canada, and they all traded with each other. And you go all the way down into New York. And then those traded with people further south, so it's not like they particularly walk. It just moves across the country. There were so many trails and so many groups that traded for different things.
I mean, this is another thing. It's sort of like when we began the last one about putting context that of the 500,000 people who lived from Maine down to Georgia, so outside of Spanish-controlled Florida, it was about 500,000 people. But of those 500,000, half of them were slaves. Another 100,000 were indentured servants. They came here, they had to work their way out of indentured. So, you know, when you boiled it all out, there's about 100,000 free, souls that were here living from Maine all the way. So it was very small. On the other hand, the native population was huge.
Except that most of them died after first contact.
Right, because of
like
of
2/3 of
disease.
them died of disease within the first few years of colonial contact.
But this notion, but
Totally
the thing
devastated
is, they had huge societies that were functioning and had lasted for thousands of years.
Well, I mean, even look at the stories, the Westborough stories of the Ganawage Indians from Montreal. They came down and they followed the north-south Indian trail that came through Westborough, and they kidnapped the boys.
Oh, the Rice
boys,
sure.
right? And
Right.
and so the reason they did that is because they were so affected by disease from colonial contact that their population was dying, and they came to kidnap children to bring in anyone that they could find into their tribe, and raise them that way. So.
Is it the disease? Was there one particular disease that devastated?
Smallpox is what I've always.
Smallpox was the one.
Right.
Yeah, that was the big one.
And it's not just here. I mean, same thing happened in Central and South America by way of the Spanish, explorers, and conquistadors, etc. And the fact is, think about our the panic or the avian flu of just even 15 years ago. But I'm trying to go way back to
Spanish flu.
the Spanish flu. Thank you. From the early 20th century. I mean, millions, at least 1 million people died of that, and no one at the time quite understood what it was, but it was easy to transmit. In the long run, I personally think those little bacteria or viruses, they're gonna get all of us at some point. It just depends how we adapt to the resistance to it. But
I want to move away. Are you carrying?
all right, come on, let's keep going. Let's keep going.
The name of the people that lived here would have they were
Nipmucks?
called Nipmucks?
Yeah, Nipmuc.
Well, then they were named Nipmucks because it means like people who lived around the water.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
There's evidence of increasing number of sites, but still the main base is the island. The main base stays the island for most of this area, at least for this site. Charlestown Meadows was probably a seasonal fall base camp. There's over 150 features that we identified in those years of digging over there. It's a center for stone tool manufacturing, meat and fish smoking, preserving, and a base camp for the families and for larger groups of them when they would come in. So it wasn't just a foraging camp anymore, they were living here. And that's, around 3,000, 2,000 years ago, quite substantially living here. So there's also evidence for agriculture, the pollen counts changing, like I said before. By the late woodland feature, Cedar Swamp is also showing much more diverse floral and faunal. You got freshwater mussels now. You've got turtle, fish, bird, dog, muskrat, woodchuck, raccoon, rabbit, beaver, herring, and snake, all found within the midden pit. So you're finding, so you're finding all of this evidence that they're catching all these things, that they're cooking them, that they're deboning them, that they're, you know, they're eating them. Yeah.
What period? About how long ago was it?
Late woodland. Yeah, that's 1,000 to 400 before present. A lot of the northern part of the island has never had any of the archaeological stuff done it. This whole area, you could spend years working in here, but the resources and the motivation to come in and look at these inland areas has really not existed. I mean, it's pretty much, you know, all of the things that we did in Westborough end with the same thing. Recommendation for further study. We recommend that you continue to look at this, you know, and then Charlestown Meadow got bulldozed to create Westborough Station so that you can't look at it anymore.
So it's usually today what we do, it's a threat. So so that's why highways, transportation, utility lines, usually there's enough money built into those budgets to have people like Michelle and teams to do. Now again, they're doing just a surface cut. They're not doing this deep thing. Or the Big Dig would be another perfect example. If you go to the archives, they've found all kinds of things, but we also spent what, $14 billion doing it or something. On the other hand, there's a more, you know, in some ways it's a very cost-effective way of what the town of Westborough has decided, because again, whether it's town meeting, the land trust, owners that give easements, you know, all this land's protected. It's not, the resource is there. I mean, we could be standing on it. We don't know about it. But the fact is, until there's more funds for the actual research and understanding, at least it's here and it's protected. So that's not a bad notion. Okay, let's go.
Okay, let's go warm up. My feet are cold.
Thank you for joining us on our walk through Cedar Swamp. We're going to end with a song. You might think it's about the Rotary here in town, but listen till the end and you'll find out what it's really about.
You take your life in your hands, I think we all agree that the Rotary, it isn't the first place anyone chooses to be, unless maybe you're picking up a pizza. Well, traffic's increasing and it comes to top. The commute's getting worse and that can get you down. So I'm gonna tell you how to get around the Rotary. First, it isn't crazy if you're kinda confused about the Rotary. There are stop signs, yield signs, and crosswalks too. It ain't a typical Rotary. There's parallel parking and some straight on. Makes you wonder what planet you've landed on. But you're not in space, look at the lines they've drawn. You're at the Rotary. First thing to remember, those in the circle have the right of way. Second thing to remember, once you're in, don't stop or delay. You might think it's nice to let someone go, but it's not polite, cause then the whole thing slows. You might make a friend, but you'll make many foes. At the Rotary, round and round the traffic goes. If you go around twice, no one will ever know. Just do it if you gotta pick up your shoes. Just follow the rules in the previous verse, and don't get upset if you get cursed. You might get in last, but you might get out first, cause it's a Rotary. I wanna remind you all of why it's here. The Rotary, it might make you feel a little better and things more clear about the Rotary. All roads feed through that single spot, cause the town was built next to Cedar Swamp. So instead of becoming a sea of asphalt, we got the Rotary. Which would you rather have? Cedar Swamp cleans our air and water. You know what can't do that? So we'll just have to put up with it.